Now that we've talked about the impact and just generally how worrisome the situation is, I also want to know a little bit about the kind of solutions you guys present to get rid of these emissions.
So we are of the opinion as an organization uh, that you can do like in my opinion, solutions is maybe step 5, step
Hmm.
6, step 7 on this process of where we are. To be very honest with you, Sanika, we are at step 0. In fact, even in some cases, -1, step -1.
Hmm.
We are nowhere close to talking about solutions.
Okay.
And it's not that solutions don't exist. Now, for example, the largest sources of methane emissions in India are from cattle
Mm-hmm.
when they burp. It's enteric fermentation, and the paddy rice crops. Because I don't know if you've noticed, there's this very common picture we see of South India fields full of water standing crops. That is paddy. When you do that and you have standing water, it creates huge amounts of methane emissions. India is the third largest methane emitter in the world.
I see.
And it's not that the government of India has not put solutions in place.
Hmm.
If you read, so there is something called as the biennial update report, which is mandated under the UNFCCC proceedings that every country who is a member has to submit. If you read the last biennial update report, which was submitted by India, I believe in 2021,
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
you will see there is an entire section on what they are saying they're going to do to reduce emissions of methane from cattle. And
Correct.
like, just to tell you some common solutions that you will find repeated in these reports and other such publications by the national government will be: change the food feed for capital for not capital cattle.
Mm-hmm.
um, give them more protein, X% protein, Y% carbohydrate, like change that ratio. The problem with all of these is, and this is for cattle, for rice, they'll say do wet and dry irrigation patterns.
I see. Okay.
The problem with these solutions is that it's not that they don't work and they don't exist. They are low tech. How do you scale something like this? How do you enforce
But
this?
but in a country like India, wouldn't a low-tech solution actually be more scalable than something that requires extreme amounts of like investments and R&D?
Oh, for sure. But the problem is, you know what the solution is. You are publishing it. You are broadcasting it on Doordarshan. You are broadcasting it on Krishi Darshan and everything that you can possibly do. Ab, I am the farmer. How do I know ये wet dry कैसे करते हैं? I
Hmm.
am going to understand what traditional farming practices are, right? Until somebody tells me, do this, I'm going to do this here and see the difference in your production, crop production.
Mhm.
I need to be incentivized as a farmer to change my traditional knowledge, to take over something that is new and uncertain, which I've heard about on radio. Like,
There,
even
I
to me, there are articles I'll read about coffee being good for you, and then I'll read articles about coffee being bad for you.
it is a complete like head spinner when we start discussing what's available out there versus what is actually um,
Yeah.
good for you. But then tell me one thing, why are we tackling something? Okay, maybe I'll rephrase this. We just mentioned different sources, right? Methane coming from paddy fields, from cattle, but there's also this whole side of vehicular traffic, or I'm guessing logistical sector contributes a lot to this as well. Um, Amongst all of these, are there any low-hanging fruit in terms of
Waste
sectors
sector,
that we can, yeah.
waste,
So waste
landfill.
would be the direct massive impact at scale that we're talking about in terms
Absolutely.
of solutions. Um,
Absolutely.
so is that easier to tackle, or is
It
actually
is
a
much easier to
low-hanging
tackle
fruit,
because,
which is harder and more complex than, say, farming?
absolutely. And the reason I say that is because you do the hardest, which is behavioral change at the farmer level, towards the very end, just logically. You solve the low-hanging fruits, easier to move tomorrow. Now, for example, we have at the national level, Prime Minister Modi launched the Swachh Bharat Abhiyan, a Swachh Bharat mission. Under the Swachh Bharat mission, landfill waste is something that has been included in the goals of the mission, right? And you will see the landfill that has is located at northern Delhi side, basically the highway that takes you, the Grand Trunk Road that takes you outside of Delhi, exits Delhi, the state into Haryana on the northern side, Majnu Ka Tea line, all of those places. That that landfill has existed for as long as I have existed. In fact, every time my family would travel from Chandigarh to Delhi, and we as kids used to be in the car sleeping, we would wake up because the stench of the landfill was so bad. We would realize that that was an association. Oh, it's horrible smelling thing outside means we've reached Delhi.
The same for Maharashtrians, the equivalent is Deonar, close to Mumbai, and we have like abandoned villages around it because it's not possible to live there anymore. Why people
Exactly.
who are actors or who have to, no choice but to work there. But yeah, the health effects and the
Yeah.
impact.
So, but in Delhi, that landfill has drastically reduced in size. From the time that I was there, it was the vertical height of a real residential tower that you would see. It's gone.
Okay.
I do not know what happened to it. And I could not tell you, even though I work in this sector, what they did with it. Did they move it to a different location? Did they burn it? Did they incinerate it? What did they do? And if they're incinerating it, I hope that the local authorities realize that that's a carcinogen that you're creating by incineration. We do not know. I do not know. But the waste sector is such a simple sector to work on because the stakeholders are the government, and the government should be able to solve its biggest problem of waste. Because think about it, if you have a landfill, real estate prices are not going to grow anywhere close to that area. No one will choose to live there, no one will want to travel there. That is going to be an economically depressed area. So landfill is improving landfills or closing landfills, making sure that landfills are taken care of, completely wiped out, is actually in the favor of the government's longer term interest in terms of creating economic activity around that area. Landfills also, now the states that I have researched with, I am also aware of the fact that in India, because of Swachh Bharat, which is doing great things in terms of making sure that the Majnu Katila northern Delhi landfill site has completely vanished. Again, I do not know why or what they did with it. Is it good, bad, ugly? Who knows? I don't know. But at the same time, it has also created that competition between states, right? Of
Of course, who's the
which is
cleanest?
the cleanest, exactly.
Yeah.
Now, I was in a meeting with somebody at a state level who told me that हमने अपने reports में लिखा है that we as the state are segregating close to 98% of our waste. But it's not true. We just have to do that because we can't appear to be last on the list of the cleanest cities, states, whatever, under Swachh Bharat Index. So it's also created perverse conflicting interests where states are ready to lie on
Fudging numbers just so that they can
segregations,
look
fudging
better.
numbers so that they can look better compared that we are not the last ones. And because you fudge numbers and you are the state or you are a government in India, think about what it does, right? So if I'm a waste to energy plant and there are multiple subsidies given by the central government to set up biogas plants. Biogas is basically capture methane from organic materials, put that into gas, sell that as compressed natural gas, which is great business. You're creating an economic model, right? If the data is fudged, that means I am putting a fudged data on how much methane is generated from that particular site into my economic model, against which I will raise money through a bank loan. My project will fail
And then
because
you
the
wonder why it
project
failed
will
because you
not run.
had data.
Exactly. And
Right.
interestingly, if you see landfill waste to energy plants, a lot of them have failed. And now that makes me wonder if they have failed because the numbers were fudged on in terms of understanding what is the amount of methane gas that a particular landfill is producing, because you're fudging numbers, right?
Yes.
At the same time, if you ask governments and different authorities what is the amount of organic material contained in a particular landfill, they
Mm.
will not tell you, because waste characterization studies have not been done. So for me to solve the landfill problem, I need to have basic data that does not exist.
This circles back to the behavioral change issue, right? Because I'm guessing they don't have these figures themselves, since most people like you and me, would refuse to segregate waste at home or source level itself. I really think that that is an issue, which I have spoken to someone for another episode on waste management on the podcast. So coming back to our discussion about the mitigation efforts, right? We talked about low hanging fruits. We talked about some sectors being more inclined to creating these emissions and also posing as a greater risk. Have you come across any positive case studies
Oh,
overall
yes.
in SLCPs, which we all can learn from and actually scale up?
I think it again, like I said, it boils down to implementation, how interested a state government is in taking these issues forward, right? And the one that really stood out for me was UP, the
Uh-huh.
government of Uttar Pradesh. The government of Uttar Pradesh is currently working on a project with the World Bank. It's the world's largest airshed air quality management program.
Okay.
And what they're doing through this program is that they're looking at air quality and emissions of, say, black carbon and other pollutants in the Indo-Gangetic Plain region of India,
Mhm.
which is basically starting on the north, Punjab, Haryana, Delhi, Uttar Pradesh, West Bengal, Bihar, Chhattisgarh, that belt. These are the states that make the Indo-Gangetic Plain,
Right.
geographically speaking. I was so impressed by Secretary of Environment for the government of Uttar Pradesh to basically stand on everybody's head and say, I want this done. I want this done. Make it happen. The exhaustiveness of the way they are working, and I was able to attend one of the stakeholder meetings where I understood what they were hoping to do, and the loans that they've taken from the World Bank, how they're planning on spending that money, how are they going to pilot technologies, how are they going to look at vehicular pollution, for example, how they're going to look at different sectors of waste. That's
Mhm.
another one that they're looking at. They're targeting that. How do you look at a systemic approach to solving emissions, and they're not looking at from the point of view, oh, is this SLCP or is it carbon dioxide? No, they're just looking at from an air quality standpoint, like how do we clean our air, how do we make this region of the world clean, because if you don't make this region of the world clean, our glaciers will melt, and our
Mm.
glaciers, the Himalayan glaciers, are responsible for providing fresh water to 6 countries in that part of this
Entire
particular part of the world,
expansion, of course.
of which 3 are nuclear powers and
Mm.
may not like each other very much.
But water
It's a
becomes
very
critical.
exactly. So you need to think about longer term national security through the lens of water, fresh water lines, which are going to be coming from your glaciers. But if you lose your glaciers, we are looking at a destabilization of this region,
Mm.
because there will be wars fought over fresh water, because you'll be building channels to get more of your rivers to give water, divert water into your countries. That's going to create more problem and tension in a region where the 3 countries do not anyway like each other to begin with.
Oh, wow.
So that part of the world and this clean air project for the Indo-Gangetic plains is critical. And I do not know personally if people realize the sort of interconnectedness of all of this with national security. But if you clean up the Indo-Gangetic plains, you will directly save your glaciers, which are responsible for your freshwaters.
I think overall climate change, national security is a
For
topic
sure.
that is so underplayed but so vital. And then it's a sum of all of these smaller pieces.
Oh
Uh,
yeah, there is
so
an author by the name of Sherry Goodman who just did a book
mhm,
called Climate Change, the Threat Multiplier. She's a Pentagon climate expert, security
okay,
expert,
okay.
and she has written this book on how climate change is a threat multiplier in national
Definitely adding this
security.
to my list.
It's a phenomenal book.
So speaking of um national security, right? This also applies for other countries and climate change, SLCPs, no matter how you categorize the descriptors, they all lead to um, a bigger international cooperation requirement from all of us. Geopolitical tensions and differing priorities of every country would also have a way in which your work or my work gets affected. So in what you are doing as an organization, um, do SLCPs and sort of international cooperation measures tie together in a neat way, or there's room for improvement? And if so, what is the current
Oh,
situation?
huge need for improvement. In fact, I would take a few steps back and say need for acknowledging how all of these dots get connected with another because they are hand in glove, in my
Mhm.
opinion. So direct impacts are on economy and national security geopolitics. And I'll explain both. Let me start with the economy bit. As heat stress increases, and one doesn't realize that the heat stress is going to increase because you will have these short lived but extremely intense heat capturing, heat trapping gases like methane, black carbon. What they're going to do is they're going to increase substantially the heat stress on India. There
Mhm.
is a World Bank report that was launched, I want to say in 2022. It's called World Bank $1 trillion cooling opportunity for India or something like that. If you just type $1 trillion cooling opportunity for India, it's going to show up as a World Bank report. That report has said that heat stress in India will reduce productivity
Yes.
of the national, like at a national level, meaning that if I as a human am contributing to in a productive way to the Indian GDP, if heat stress increases in a business as usual scenario, my productivity decreases. That means my me as in I am talking about me as an individual, but think about it at a country level. That means
Absolutely.
the overall productivity of the country is decreasing. Overall productivity of country decreasing means you do not have the same output against GDP numbers. So a dollar invested currently in a productive economy will make $5 of output.
Mhm.
In a decreased productivity, $1 of investment into a country will probably mean one or minus one.
Or even lose money, yeah.
Correct. The minute you start going down that frame,
Mhm.
you can forget about FDI, you can forget about Make in India, you can forget about making India economically successful because your overall productivity goes down. Exports, which I spoke of earlier, if your productivity, agricultural output decreases, your exports are damaged directly, which is a huge source for any country in the world for money,
Mhm.
which is the country's income, India's income. So, heat stress has direct impact on how good or bad the economy in India will be. And when I say India, I mean for the rest of the world, and more so, critically more so for the global south, because that will make or break the deal.
Of course. So there's the heat impact, economic losses, but also the health impacts, the longevity and population
Easy.
actual capacity to work.
Not just that,
Definitely.
again, the government has to pay for aims, right? So how many aims do you need to construct? How
Disaster.
much manpower and government spending you have to do on providing healthcare in India? We're a socialist country.
Mhm.
Private healthcare. How much you're racking up the bills, right, for health? It's an economic thing. It's everything boils down to money. Health, climate, everything that you can think of will boil down to money. And then you will also go into the discussions of if abhi, even now we have farmer suicides. Imagine the rate at which that problem will worsen. It's a cascading effect, right? And it'll take the entire economy down with it. If we think that heat stress is the problem of the poor man sitting out on the street because mere paas AC hai, we are mistaken.
Well, the ACs are what is also contributing to a lot
Exactly.
of heating, but that's another issue, right? I usually like to ask the guests this question. If you were all powerful and you were given a chance at creating any policy that would be implemented from tomorrow, what is the one policy that you would choose in order to tackle climate, as well as, of course, SLCPs come in that framework of overall mitigation?
Um, I think my answer is going to be twofold again. I would have, if I had a magic wand tomorrow
Mhm,
and I had to not worry about the United Nations process of consensus,
mhm.
and if I, in a magical world, had all countries agreeing to me, the first thing I would do is to figure out how to save the Arctic. And domestically in India, what I would do is to basically mandate the creation of heat plans, heat action plans at the city district level to understand, again, science data led understanding of what is your heat stress profile going to look like, what is the business as usual scenario going to look like, how much intervention do you need, and what does that gap look like, what is the dollar value of that gap, what are the sectors that are contributing to that. Those would be my two policies.
Could you explain the Arctic reference?
Arctic is, if we, again, let's I'm not going to talk about the politics for now. I'll first explain why the Arctic matters.
Mhm, mhm.
If tomorrow we switched off all emissions in the world and Arctic continued to melt, Arctic sea ice continued to melt, we would die.
Mhm.
It is, the Amazon forests are called the lungs of the world. I want to call Arctic as the nervous center, spinal cord, or brain of the world.
Okay.
If you're brain dead and your heart and lungs are still fine, you'll still be dead. Arctic plays a critically important role in the stabilization of the Earth's geophysical cycles. It controls currents, it controls winds, it controls rainfalls. And currently, scientifically speaking, Arctic is warming 4 times the global average. And
Oh,
we are
wow.
losing substantial amount of Arctic sea ice, which is as a result. So ice is not just water and ice. That
Mm.
ice is millions of years old and it has frozen in itself greenhouse gases that are equal to 25 years of pollution and emissions. So the minute you start losing Arctic sea ice, you are releasing emissions worth 25 years into the atmosphere simultaneously all at once, which is what is happening. It's
That
called
is
the
scary.
permafrost.
Mhm.
So it's a bomb, essentially. It's a ticking bomb. The day it bursts, we are all going down with it. We, as in the world, not India alone, but we, the world, the global community. And here's what's happening with the Arctic. In fact, I'm very pleased to share with you that government of India is one of the few governments around the world that has a very good handle on research and development and consequences of loss of Arctic sea ice in the world. So, under the Ministry of Earth Sciences, there is an autonomous research organization owned by the government, the publicly owned entity. It's called National Center for Polar and Ocean Research, NCPR.
Mhm.
They're based in Goa. and they have been conducting research and development for years on end on studying Arctic and what are the implications of loss of Arctic sea ice on India.
Mhm.
And there is a paper that was done by the secretary of the Ministry of Earth Sciences, who professionally is a scientist,
Mhm.
and it's another Arctic expert who's also a PhD in it. So Dr. Ravi Chandran, Secretary MOES, and Dr. Saurav Chatterjee, who's a research scientist at NCPR, and they have written a paper describing the loss of Arctic sea ice and its implications on India. And I'm just telling you the layman summary of what the paper does, but it tells you that the summer months of the year, any given year, when the warming is at the peak and the ice melts to the thinnest or does not exist in the
Mhm.
Arctic, India experiences changes in monsoon patterns, degree of rainfall, variability of rainfall, and that causes flooding in central India, flooding in North India, and droughts in East India.
It's directly a direct correlation, basically.
Exactly.
Mhm.
So this correlation is scientifically called teleconnections. And these correlations that the Arctic has with India, it has with the Himalayan glaciers and a
Wow.
vice versa relationship. And it has these correlations with jet streams, El Nino effects, currents that bring in wind and rainfall all over the world. It has teleconnections and implications, therefore, for everybody in the world. We are better off, slightly better off in India because we are able to have an excellent organization like NCP or do the research and gather the data. The rest of the world is unaware. Like, can you imagine what Africa as a continent would have to do in order to generate that R&D? And no one speaks about it. And the direct implication is due to the loss of Arctic sea ice. And what is causing the loss of Arctic sea ice? Of course, general climate change. But Russia plans to build something called as the Northern Shipping Route,
Right.
NSR, through the Arctic. And their logic is if you go on top of the earth and down into Europe, it's shorter than going through the equator, which is the fattest part of the
Well, their
world,
work has
which is the
already
Suez Canal.
started along with a lot of military
It
bases there.
it has. And can you imagine shipping traffic going through a climate and eco-sensitive zone of the world? I'm telling you again,
Mm.
Amazon is the lungs of the world, Arctic is the nervous center of the earth.
Mm.
You are directly trying to attack the spinal cord of a human being. That person will not live that long. It is exactly what is happening. And the idea is to transfer oil and gas from the Arctic region using the NSR to export it to different countries. It could not get worse than that, because if you have spills, oil spills,
Of course.
if you have and not just oil spills, the ships themselves
The
use
emissions
nuclear
of
ice
that.
breaking, and the
Mm.
ship itself uses something called as heavy fuel oil, HFO, which is the worst version of diesel you can think.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like, if diesel is bad, HFO is like 1,000 times worse. And there is a paper ban that allows indefinitely for flagged ships to carry on in the Arctic zone. So there is somewhat of a paper ban. It means zero in terms of protecting the region. So
Yeah.
India, again, geopolitically, has to think of the long-term implications that it faces, because we will be the victim of the changes of the Arctic, and we do not have any rights in the Arctic because we are not a country that is close to the Arctic. Jurisdictionally, we do not have a right. We're only observers. So observers can only act through member countries. And with Russia being suspended in light of the Ukraine war from the
Mm-hmm.
Arctic Council, which is the governing body of this thing, Russia can independently act. It's a sovereign country. 60+% of the Arctic is under Russia's direct jurisdiction.
Oh,
So
wow.
India is at this point where it has to choose what it needs to do for its own long term well being of the Arctic. And that cannot happen if we do not protect the Arctic. If we do not protect the Arctic, you can forget about everything else. You can tomorrow go 100% solar in India, we will still die.
This is grave.
It is extremely grave and very, very sad that I can tell you that maybe 11 people in India would know about it. IITM is another institution based in Pune, Indian Institute of Tropical Meteorology, and NCPOR, and obviously the scientists who work in the ministry with these two organizations are probably the only people in the entire country who understand the gravity of what we are
Right.
dealing with. And globally, that number is even less. And I can tell you for a fact that apart from maybe India, China, the more sort of well-to-do countries of the global south that have the capability of research and development, the rest of the global south is completely clueless about what this means. And of course, when ice melts, it increases the volume of water. So we're also looking at submerging
We are already,
lots of parts of the world.
of course. Plus, I think the ocean currents, the changes have already started reflecting, and marine life, including other impacts as well, are
Yeah,
very
no
clear.
one knows the implications yet. We don't know what this does for, say, fish resources. I mean, we are going to die is a separate issue, but like even food we eat,
How soon?
how soon will we run
Uh,
out of those
It's
resources?
going to be
What
a
do we do with that?
short-lived population.
Short-lived,
Curvature. That's a really
unfortunately.
dark way to
I
end this
know.
episode, which I don't want to do. But usually, I like to draw attention to something that we can do, right? Because when we start talking about these situations, it's an effect that causes more anxiety than anything else. And I think I want to really strictly keep the conversations um, while giving a reality check and letting people understand what the science is. I always like to bring the conversation back to at an individual level, what can I do? So when I speak about SLCPs, what is it that can be recommended for people to do at an individual level to have at least a little ripple effect of positive change?
What we can do as individuals, because a lot of times we as individuals feel that we do not have that power to make the change at that, say, like a country level, right? But we do. And it's very similar sounding to a lot of people who will say go out and vote.
Hmm.
Something very similar. Make climate a part of your right when you vote so that it
I
becomes a
voted
critical.
yesterday, literally, but there was no climate agenda anywhere.
Exactly. So yes, the onus of the responsibility of and the burden is on collectively on everybody to make sure that we're able to protect the environment, but ultimately it is very much on the companies that have done billions of dollars in profits and
Hmm.
still continue to and get away with murders in terms of what we have left of climate now. So I think the question to ask is, how do we as individuals make them accountable for their actions as we, do our little bit, which is compost, segregate waste. Do not give your, people who come to collect the trash from your homes dry and wet waste together. Something as simple as that.
Mhm.
Make climate a voting issue. Make it a part of political memorandums. And make climate a subject that the urban populace is willing to vote on and change the decisions of the voting patterns. But collectively as individuals, the greatest thing we could do for climate is to hold accountable the companies and the policies of the government that
Of
enable
course.
those companies to get away with whatever it is that they have gotten away so far with. So I
Zareen,
think
thank you.
that would
It's
be
a
my.
brilliant answer because I couldn't have summed it up better. Yes, the onus does not lie on us. We can do smaller actions that keep us connected to nature or a sort of simple living. But the main agenda is to hold people accountable, people at that scale and that stature along. These are very much reasonable questions to ask, and thanks for bringing that up.
It was an absolute pleasure, Sanika. Thank you so much for having me today. It was so much fun to talk about things that I work on a daily basis in in sort of understanding and walking with you and sort of understanding through this communication and this chat with you today. Even for myself, it was really refreshing to be like, oh yeah, of course, these all of these things that I work on, which are very mechanical to me, have very human aspects to them. So thank you for helping me revisit that part of my brain and remind me of why I started doing this and why this is important for me. So thank you very much for
That's
having me.
amazing. Thank you for the kind words. And yeah, as long as we can keep the human element alive, I think we'll be fine, is what I'd
We
like
will
to
be.
close on.
We
Have
will
a
be.
great day. Thank you for your time and good luck on all the future climate mitigation and crusading projects. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Yes, we will keep you posted.